Hello and welcome to the BookTube channel, Jack in the Book Stack, where I talk about a wide variety of book genres and the bookish lifestyle. Today you are going to see a wide variety of genres and what I like to read, because in 2017 I started using the website GoodReads to track the books that I have read, my ratings, everything I want to read, etc. Since that glorious day in 2017, I have read over 850 books across all sorts of genres. And something really fun is that you can go to your read books and you can sort them in different ways. So for this video, I sorted them from the lowest rated to the highest rated. I wanted to know what are the worst books I have read according to GoodReads ratings, and I want to tell you if I agree with that. Does my personal reading preference align with everybody else on GoodReads? That's what we're going to find out today when I cover the 20 worst books I've read. I have done a video similar to this, but it had a much more positive tone. I did the 20 best books that I have read according to GoodReads, and I definitely found that my personal taste did not align, because a lot of those books were very, very well written. I could agree that they were good books, but were they my favorites? No. Largely, a lot of them were not on my all-time favorite list. So that was really fun to examine. So now we're going to do the opposite, and we're going to look at the worst books. Now for the criteria for this list, and I'm changing it up a little bit from the criteria I used in the last video, which, for example, I focused on fiction only, but looking at the worst books, there's no non-fiction in it, so it just defaults to fiction only. I'm going to keep the same criteria that I'm not going to talk about sequels, only book one in a series in this worst list, which is the same criteria. The new criteria for this one is that there were some language books in the worst read list on GoodReads, but I don't want to count those because the purpose of those is to be informative and to educate me on learning Spanish. It has nothing to do with writing style, plot, character development, no. So I can see why they're rated low, but like for my intent, like it's not the same. So those are excluded. Let's dive in with the 20th worst book that I have ever read according to GoodReads. And that book, it really shocks me because it's a classic that I had to read in school even. So maybe that's why like people have some resentment towards it. But the book is The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now the summary for this one, I pulled it up on GoodReads because it like summarizes it more concisely than I can. But this is set in 17th century Puritan Boston, Massachusetts during the years 1642 to 1649. The main character, her name is Hester Prynne, and she conceives a daughter through an affair, although she doesn't reveal her lover's identity. So as a punishment, a scarlet letter is sewn onto her clothes. It's the letter A for adultery. And so this is on all her clothes. It's used for public shaming, and it's her punishment for her sin and her secrecy. She struggles to create a new life of repentance and dignity. Throughout the book, Hawthorne explores themes of legalism, sin, and guilt. Fun topics. So I'm really shocked. Like, this is such a classic. I'm shocked it's rated so poorly, because usually classics are classics for a reason. I read it in, May 2021, and I rated it 3 stars. I didn't love it. It was very dense in the writing style, and we're talking about Puritan Boston, okay? Like, there's very heavy religious descriptions and all of that, and so it was just too dense for me. I didn't really jive with the writing style, and it took me out of the story a little bit. But I love the concept of it, and the shaming someone for their sexual activity, like that theme really transcends the years. And so I enjoyed kind of examining it from that perspective. How this is the 20th worst book I've read according to like the ratings shocks me. Absolutely shocks me. The 19th worst book that I have read according to GoodReads was also a little bit of a shocker because it's a newer release and I have seen it all over the bookish social media. So the fact that like GoodReads ratings doesn't reflect the popularity is very interesting to me. I am talking about the thriller, The Writing Retreat. I I read this one in April of 2023. I rated it 3 stars, which is kind of like my baseline. Like every book starts at a 3-star for me and goes up or down depending on my enjoyment. So I just felt neutral about it. The concept, the summary, was very intriguing because I love an isolated setting. And this is about a girl who wants to be an author, but she's kind of struggling. She's kind of thinking about giving up. She gets invited to go to a writing retreat hosted by this very famous horror author. And she's a little bit hesitant about going because her frenemy is also going, but she decides to suck it up. Hey, who cares about this drama? I'm gonna go. And so she goes to this retreat, and they're told that throughout the course of a month when they're staying in this house, they have to write a book. And the winner, whoever writes the best book, gets like some grand prize. And so it's like, it's a writing retreat. So they're writing this book, getting feedback. Well, a lot of creepy things start happening in this house. And even as I'm describing it to you, it sounds so good. But for me, it just kind of fell a little flat. I felt like it was a little bit too forced and also a little bit too repetitive of some other things that I have read. So I rated it 3 stars, but I wouldn't even consider this one of the worst books that I've read. So I do not think I align with the masses on this one. Number 18 on the list is a standalone fantasy. I believe it is YA, and that book is Lies We Sing to the Sea by Sarah Underwood. I got this Illumicrate special edition. So cool. I read this in, let me see, May 2023. I rated it 2 stars. And just when I'm like looking up this list on GoodReads so I could like read it off to you guys, I was looking at some of the 1-star reviews, and that was largely because they thought that this was a Greek mythology retelling, and it was not. So like people were saying like, the author clearly didn't read the Odyssey, they don't know what they're talking about, and I think that ticked a lot of people off. I myself have not read the Odyssey, so I wasn't comparing this story to anything else. So I don't think that bugged me as much as it did for these other ratings. I think I rated it 2 stars just because I was unsatisfied with how it ended. But let me pull up the GoodReads description for you. GoodReads says that each spring, Ithaca condemns 12 maidens to the noose. This is the price a vengeful Poseidon demands for the lives of Queen Penelope's 12 maids, hanged and cast into the depths centuries ago. But when that fate comes for Leto, death is not what she thought it would be. Instead, she wakes on a mysterious island and meets a girl with green eyes and the power to command the sea. A girl named Melantho, who says one more death can stop 1,000. The prince of Ithaca must die, or the tides of fate will drown them all. Sarah Underwood weaves an epic tapestry of lies, love, tragedy, perfect for the fans of Madeline Miller, Alexander Bracken, and Renee Ahde. I think the summary accurately describes what this book is about. That's exactly what I got. So I don't know why this is rated so low, although I'm not totally surprised since I only rated it 2 stars myself. The 17th worst book that I've read according to GoodReads also shocks me, but again, I don't know why, because again, I rated it 2 stars, so maybe I'm aligned on this one, but you're gonna be shocked, I think, because it is also a classic as well. I'm talking about Turn of the Screw by Henry James. So I read this one in October 2023, so relatively recently, and I'm kind of labeling it as forgettable because I'm having a hard time remembering why I rated it 2 stars. Again, I thought it was more dense and difficult to read, but this is another situation where the summary of it sounds so good. So this is a young woman's first job, governess for 2 weirdly beautiful, strangely distant, oddly silent children, Miles and Flora, at a forlorn estate. Again, I love estate settings, isolated settings, so that calls to me. An estate haunted by a beckoning evil. Half-seen figures who glare from dark towers and dusty windows, silent, foul phantoms who, day by day, night by night, come closer and closer. With growing horror, the helpless governess realizes the fiendish creatures want the children, seeking to corrupt their bodies, possess their minds, own their souls. But worse, much worse, the governess discovers that Miles and Flora have no terror of the lurking evil. I love creepy children in horror books. That is awesome. So they want the Walking Dead as badly as the dead want them. That summary sounds so good, and I'm struggling with why this was so forgettable for me. But I remember the creepy children, and I liked their vibe. I think it was just dense writing and an unsatisfying ending for me. I think that's why I rated this a little bit lower, but again, shocked that a classic is rated so poorly. Number 16th on the list. I'm actually going to agree with this placement because I understand why it's on the list. I am talking about the very dark, very spicy Court of the Vampire Queen by Katie Robert. Okay, Katie Robert is one of my favorite spicy authors. She has amazing imagination, creative, spicy spice. I really adore her books. Maybe not this one. This one's a little bit lower on the spectrum. So I read this in September 2022. I rated it 3 stars. So again, that's kind of like average for me. So I didn't like hate this book, but I do understand why it's lower on the list because it's pretty ridiculous. The summary on the back of the book: all Mina ever wanted was to escape her father's control. Half human, half vampire, she lived eternally torn between 2 worlds, never fully experiencing the pleasures of either, until her father chose her as the pawn in his latest political move, gifting her to the darkly powerful and dangerously seductive Malachi Zion. It says that he opens Mina up to a world she never knew could be hers for the taking. That world is like a reverse harem wide shoes situation. So there's her and then a bunch of other dudes. This is so much spice, light on the plot. But when I say that it's ridiculous, it's because like her gigantic O is like the curse breaking thing. Like that's the goal to achieve, to break the curse. It just reads like a bad adult film. And I like spicy books. I like erotica from time to time. Like nothing against like the level and amount of spice in this, but it was just too cheesy for me to really be entertained and like take it seriously. It tried to have a plot. It really, really did. It tried to have chemistry and character connections, but it was a little bit ridiculous. So even though I rated it 3 stars, I can see why GoodReads ranks it as one of the worst books that I've read. Now for number 15 on the list, which I read in May 2023, and I rated 3 stars. Pretty much because I love the ambiance. That book is Road of Bones by Christopher Golden. I really liked the setting of this. Another situation where it just kind of got a weird ending, a little bit of an ambiguous ending for my liking. But this is a horror book, and this is about an American documentarian who travels to a haunted highway across the frozen tundra of Siberia. And I really like this, and I think it was haunted because people died like along the highway, but because it's so cold in Siberia, their bodies are just frozen beneath the surface along this highway. And so it's really creepy. And this was so suspenseful, and there was a lot going on in this like isolated place. Surrounded by barren trees in a snow-covered wilderness with a dim, dusky sky forever overhead, Siberia's Kolyma Highway is 1,200 miles of gravel-packed permafrost within driving distance of the Arctic Circle. For motorists are not the only victims of the highway. That's what I was saying. It's like a massive graveyard. So fascinated by the history, this documentarian and a producer, he goes with like a film crew to capture life on the road and like talk to people that live along there, and like creepy. It's not too long. So I actually I know I didn't rate this like a high rating, so I guess you would think it's not surprising to be on the worst list, but I don't think this is the worst book that I've read. I mean, I own it. I have no intention of getting rid of it. I want to reread it one day. So I don't think it's the worst. It has a really cool atmosphere. Number 14 on the list, I can understand why it's here because it has less than 200 ratings that are landing it in the worst read list. And I thought about copying my criteria from my last video where there has to be a threshold, like minimum amount of reviews, because otherwise it gets skewed. But I decided not to have that criteria because I want to talk about this book, because I think if more people read it, I think it would increase the rating because it's really good. This is translated from Japanese. It is a vampire story, and it is called A Small Charred Face by Kazuki Sakuraba. And I was looking this up to confirm my rating and everything. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars, and my review of it, because I actually like typed up a review in GoodReads, I never thought I could read such an emotional story about vampires. This does not read like a horror novel at all, but more like a literary fiction. There are 3 stories about sacrifice, connection, love, and loss, and it was very sweet. So maybe the low ratings is because people thought it was a vampire story and that it would be horror, and it wasn't. So maybe they just had the wrong expectations. So the summary on GoodReads says, even monsters need families. What are the bamboo? They are from China. They look just like us. They live by night. They drink human lifeblood, but otherwise keep their distance. And every century they grow white blooming flowers. A boy named Kyo is saved from the precipice of death by bamboo, a vampire born of the tall grasses. They start an enjoyable yet strange shared life together, Kyo and the gentle bamboo. But for bamboo, communication with a human being is the greatest sin. So I can see why it's rated low if people think this is a horror. I loved it, gave it 4 stars. It does not deserve to be on this list of the worst books that I've read. Number 13 on the list was very popular. This was a book chosen for Reese's Book Club, so I'm surprised that it's rated so low. I am talking about The Sanatorium. I read this book by Sarah Pease in March of 2022. I rated it 3 stars. Another situation where I was intrigued by a very isolated setting, but I think the mystery, it was like a murder mystery, and it was just too drawn out. It didn't give me as much of the creepy vibes I wanted from like a sanatorium that's, you know, being repurposed as a resort. So I think it just dragged on and wasn't very impactful, and I think I just got kind of bored. Saying it's in the top 15 of the worst books I've ever read seems a little bit extreme, but I can definitely tell you it is not one of my favorites. Number 12 on the list, I read in December 2022, and I gave it 2 stars. I am talking about the romantic comedy, A Merry Little Meet Cute by Julie Murphy and Sierra Simone. This one had a really cool concept of a Hallmark type movie, like a holiday romance movie that's supposed to be like cheesy and lighthearted and fun. But it is cast and crew is entirely from the adult film industry. And so like the leading lady is a star in that industry, but like they don't want anyone to know that's what she's known for, except for the love interest in the film, the lead actor. He recognizes her. He actually subscribes to her like OnlyFans type page, like he's a fan. And so he knows who she is. It sounded really cute, and you know what? It is. It is kind of cute. There are lots of puns. If you like the "that's what she said" types of jokes from like The Office that Steve Carell does, then you might really like this. There's just so many puns because the cast and crew all know each other from this experience. And yet everyone else on set like doesn't know that's where they're from, so they don't realize they're saying something like dirty, and then everyone else starts snickering and laughing. Kind of fun in that regard, and really good holiday vibes. For this one, I did write up a review, and some of the critiques I have, why I gave it a 2-star rating, is that it was very predictable, which isn't always a bad thing, but I mean, if that's something that bothers you, be prepared for that. I said that it was 100 pages too long for what the story was. It was painful to get through, and it was overly done trying to cram in all the representation. Same-sex parents, sex workers, bisexuality, mental illness, plus size, depression, and I felt it tried too hard to be all things to all people and made it feel too gimmicky. So I can see why this would be on the GoodReads worst list of what I've read. I think that brings us to number 11 on the list, and I'm so upset. I'm triggered because I rated this horror book 5 stars. I loved it. I read this in May 2023 and enjoyed it so much. I'm talking about Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. I love this for the horror of like the monster under the bed type vibes. Oh my gosh, I love a haunted house. I love the monster under the bed thing. I was truly scared reading this, and it was so interesting. Let me read you the summary from GoodReads. So this one says, "Come home," Vera's mother called, and Vera obeyed. In spite of their long estrangement, in spite of the memories, she's come back to the home of a serial killer. Back to face the love she had for her father and the bodies he buried there. Coming home is hard enough for Vera, and to make things worse, she and her mother aren't alone. A parasitic artist has moved into the guest house out back and is slowly stripping Vera's childhood for spare parts. He insists that he isn't the one leaving notes around the house in her father's handwriting, but who else could it possibly be? There are secrets yet undiscovered in the foundations of the notorious Crowder house. Vera must face them and find out for herself just how deep the rot goes. This was so cool because it combined these paranormal events going on in the house that give you like that haunted house vibe, while at the same time the realistic true crime type horror of her father was a convicted serial killer and hid the bodies in the house. And the whole town knows. So she has like this horrible reputation. She's estranged from her mother from it. She doesn't want to be back home in this town where everybody knows who she is, and the house has this like reputation behind it, and people just flock to it as the site of this horrific event. I loved it. I don't know why GoodReads has this as one of the worst books that I've ever read, because it was phenomenal. Now we're breaking into the top 10. The 10th worst book that I've read according to GoodReads is a horror book. The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. I read this one in October 2023, so I read this for spooky season last year. I myself gave it 2 stars. For me, it was just a little bit too weird and without a point. So it had a lot of things going for it. I can see why it's popular, like I've seen it around a lot, but I can also understand why it is in the worst books list. So this is about 7-year-old Wen. And I really love kids in horror books and horror stories because they can be so creepy. So she is vacationing at a remote cabin with her parents and far removed from the everyday bustle. So again, we have like an isolated setting. We have a cabin setting, which I love. So you see, like, the reasons I picked this up, I was very intrigued. So they're cut off from all cell phones and internet. Ooh, that's a setup for a horror book. On a summer day, as Wen catches grasshoppers into the front yard, a stranger unexpectedly appears. Leonard is the largest man Wen has ever seen, but he is friendly. Of course he is, right? With a warm smile that wins her over instantly. Leonard and Wen continue to talk and play until 3 more strangers, all dressed like Leonard in jeans and button-down shirts, come down the road carrying strange, menacing objects. In a panic, she tells Leonard that she must go back inside the cabin, but before she goes, her new friend tells her, "None of what's going to happen is your fault. You haven't done anything wrong, but the 3 of you will have to make some tough decisions. I wish with all my broken heart you didn't have to." As Wen sprints away towards her parents, Leonard calls out, "Your dads won't want to let us in, Wen, but they have to. We need your help to save the world." Wow, that sounds ominous and spooky, and I was so optimistic for this, but like I said, it just took a weird turn, and I couldn't, it's not that it has to link to reality, but it has to like link to like a purpose or a point for me, and it just fell flat. So that's why I rated it 2 stars, and I can see why other readers would have done similarly. The 9th worst book I've ever read, I would also describe as being really weird, ambiguous, and without purpose. And I read this in 2023. I remember being really disappointed by it because it had such a cool concept. I'm talking about The Heartbeat. And I read this one, I gave it 3 stars in 2023, and I was just so disappointed. It's a literary fiction that has a cool premise. We have a wife and a mother. She finds out that her husband has been having an affair. She's devastated. The writing, I remember the writing around this was really beautiful, so it has that going for it. They come up as a couple with the awesome idea that she can get revenge on him in 3 ways. She can hurt him in 3 ways. It can be physical, emotional, mental, revenge in any way. And I loved the idea of the anticipation and the tension, because he's freaking out. What is she going to do to exact her revenge? And then from her perspective, she falls into this, she spirals. She falls into a rabbit hole of what is she going to do? And she starts researching all these like natural disasters and these things, and it's like you really don't know what direction she's going to go because she is really devastated by this betrayal. And like I said, really cool concept. It just went a really ambiguous and weird direction. So I can see why that wouldn't have landed for a lot of other people. Definitely not the worst written book I've ever read. Like I said, the writing was very beautiful, the concept was very well done. So it's hard to say this was in the worst, like my personal, but I just was very, very disappointed by it. So I guess I'm not surprised others felt the same. I just looked up my GoodReads review for the next book on this list, and I said that it has some creepy vibes, but it was aggressively bland. I'm talking about the horror book, The Neighbors. And I read this one in July 2022. I rated this 2 stars. I did not enjoy it at all, apparently. So I agree with this being on the list. GoodReads has the summary of this one as Andrew Morrison sacrificed everything. His childhood, his education, the girl of his dreams to look after his alcoholic mother. But enough is enough, and now he's determined to get out and live his life. That means trading the home he grew up in for a rented room in the house of an old childhood friend, both of which are in sorry shape. The only thing worse than Drew's squalid new digs and sullen new roommate is the envy he feels for the house next, a picture-perfect suburban domicile straight out of Norman Rockwell, with a couple of happy householders to match. But the better acquainted he gets with his new neighbors, especially the sweet and sexy Harlow Ward, the more he suspects unspeakable darkness beyond the white picket fence. At the intersection of Blue Velvet and Basic Instinct lies The Neighbors, an insidiously entertaining tale of psychological suspense and mounting terror by the boldest new master of the form, Ania Alburn. Another cool concept, but yeah, like I said, it was aggressively bland for me. Next on the list, we have another Reese Witherspoon book club pick. So I don't know if she picks a lot of winners here. People read these books, sure, but they're not rating very well. This one is a thriller. It is called Still Lives. I read this in December of 2018. I rated it 3 stars. So 2018, I'm having a hard time like remembering what I thought about it. The GoodReads summary says that this is about Kim Lord. She's an avant-garde figure, feminist icon, and agent provocateur in the LA art scene. Her groundbreaking new exhibition, Still Lives, is comprised of self-portraits depicting herself as famous murdered women, the Black Dahlia, Chandra Levy, Nicole Brown Simpson, among many others, and the works are as compelling as they are disturbing, implicating a culture that is too accustomed to violence against women. As the city's richest art patrons pour into the museum's opening night, all the staff, including editor Maggie Richner, hope the event will be enough to save the historic institution's flailing finances. Except, Kim Lord never shows up to her own gala. It just kind of sounds repetitive of other mysteries, other thrillers, and I think that's how I felt about it. I thought it was just fine, but obviously didn't have a huge impact for me. I mean, 2018 is a long time ago, so I guess it's not that strange, but I think I can see why this is on the GoodReads lowest rated list, because it has a lot of reviews, being that Reese Witherspoon endorsed it as part of her book club, and if it fell flat for me, if I felt it was forgettable, if I felt it was repetitive for other things I've read, I can see why others would have rated this poorly. If I'm counting correctly, then we are at number 6 for the worst books that I've read, and this one, I enthusiastically agree with it being on this list. It's one of the worst books that I've read. I hated it. I'm talking about a book called Death in Her Hands. I read this in January of 2024, so pretty recently. I rated it 2 stars, but I should probably lower that. It gets 2 stars because the writing was truly beautiful. The descriptions were beautiful. I picked this up because it follows, I believe, a 70-year-old woman, and I always love more mature female main characters in my stories. And she is just out strolling one day in the trails or pathway by her house, and she finds a note, something really disturbing about someone being dead and you'll never find the body, or something like that. So it's like a mystery, like a literary fiction mystery, as she's thinking about what this is. And the self-dialogue is so interesting, but she goes off on this train of thought that is so disconnected from reality. So she finds this note and she's like, oh, well, what do I think happened? Maybe there's a body and it's buried over there, and who could the killer be? And maybe they're still around. And then later she gets pulled over. Maybe it's this policeman, and she gets all nervous about talking to him. He probably wants to come after me. He's probably going to follow me, and her own paranoia just expands. And that actually wasn't even that bad, but then she goes off on this tangent. She walks into her kitchen and she sees bagels, and so she starts talking about bagels for paragraphs, and you're like, no, focus, lady, focus. And so that could be, that like stream of consciousness, distracted writing could be really frustrating to readers, and I hated what the author did to close this out. Hated it. I think she did our main character dirty. I didn't like that like representation for our 7-year-old female main character. Did not like it. Hated this book, and it's not surprising because this this author actually wrote one of 3 books that I label as my least favorite books of all time. My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Spoiler alert, that didn't make it on this list, but it's on my personal list. But I'm at least satisfied that something else this author wrote is on this list according to GoodReads. We are now in the top 5, and this next book I rated 4 stars. I read it in August of 2022, so I very much disagree with this being on the GoodReads list for worst books that I've read. I am talking about the book Good Rich People. This is by Eliza Jane Brazier, and let me tell you what the summary is. Lila has always believed that life is a game that she is destined to win, but her husband, Graham, takes the game to dangerous levels. The wealthy people invite self-made success stories to live in their guest house and then conspire to ruin their lives. Isn't that so cool? Like, I love rich people drama, and they're just so rich and so bored that they just want to ruin people's lives as a game, like it's a competitive game for them. After all, there's nothing worse than a bootstrapper. Demi has always felt like odds were stacked against her. At the end of her rope, she seizes a risky opportunity to take over another person's life and unwittingly becomes the subject of the upstairs couple's wicked entertainment. But Demi has been struggling all her life, and she's not about to go down without a fight. So it's like a you picked the wrong girl type of thing. And how are they going to outmaneuver each other? In a twist that neither woman sees coming, the game quickly devolves into chaos and rockets towards an explosive conclusion. Because every good rich person knows, in money and in life, it's winner take all. Even if you have to leave a few bodies behind. This was so fun. It was like cheeky and over the top, and just like people trying to outsmart each other and catch each other, ruin each other's lives. I really liked it, and like the dynamic of like the rich people doing this for fun. I think he had like a really twisted mother too. Like it was the husband and the mother that like are pushing the girl to like participate in the games, and then the other girl that their victim, their target. I like this. How is this in the top 5 worst books? Like, are you guys okay? This was wildly entertaining. In February 2023, I read The Death of Jane Lawrence. I rated this 2 stars, and this is number 4 on the list of worst books according to GoodReads. Now, this one, I don't know, it has like this gothic feel to it, and I was really attracted to that originally, but I think this is another situation that just fell flat. I even picked this book up because it was the lowest rated on my GoodReads TBR, so I knew what I was getting into, and I don't know if that framed my enjoyment level. But let me tell you what it's about according to GoodReads. Practical, unassuming Jane Shoringfield has done the calculations and decided that the most secure path forward is this: a husband in a marriage of convenience who will allow her to remain independent and occupied with meaningful work. Her first choice, the dashing but reclusive Dr. Augustine Lawrence, agrees to her proposal with only one condition: that she must never visit Lindridge Hall, his crumbling family manor outside of town. Yet on their wedding night, an accident strands her at his door in a pitch-black rainstorm, and she finds him changed. Gone is the bold, courageous surgeon, and in his place is a terrified, paranoid man who cannot tell reality from nightmare and fears Jane is an apparition come to haunt him. By morning, Augustine is himself again, but Jane knows something is deeply wrong at Lindridge Hall. Geez, what was your first clue there, sister? With the man she has so hastily bound her safety to. Again, promising summary, but just fell flat for me, and that's why I rated it 2 stars, and I can see why GoodReads ranks it low as well. We're in the top 3. It's about to get juicy now. The 3 worst books I've read out of over 850. Number 3 is also a victim of what I was saying. The book was just weird. My GoodReads review from it was, I don't even understand what the point of that was. I read this book in September of 2020. I rated it 2 stars. Again, another disappointment, something that was sounded really cool. The book was Catherine House by Elizabeth Thomas. And this is one that I say I'm really disappointed because the summary sounded so cool. It's like has dark academia vibes, and so many books described as weird actually really work for me, and so it's always a toss-up which way it's gonna fall. But let me tell you the book description on this one. Catherine House is a school of higher learning like no other. Hidden deep in the woods of rural Pennsylvania, this crucible of reformist liberal arts study with its experimental curriculum, wildly selective admissions policy, and formidable endowment has produced some of the world's best minds. Prize-winning authors, artists, inventors, Supreme Court justices, presidents. For those lucky few selected, tuition, room, and board are free, but acceptance comes with a price. Students are required to give the house 3 years, summers included, completely removed from the outside world. Family, friends, television, music, even their clothing must be left behind. In return, the school promises its graduates a future of sublime power and prestige, and that they can become anything or anyone that they desire. Among this year's incoming class is Inez, who expects to trade blurry nights of parties, pills, cruel friends, and dangerous men for rigorous intellectual discipline, only to discover an environment of sanctioned revelry. The school's enigmatic director, Victoria, encourages students to explore, to expand their minds, to find themselves in their place within the formidable black iron gates of Catherine. But for Inez, Catherine is the closest thing to home she's ever had, and her serious, timid roommate, Baby, soon becomes an unlikely friend. Yet, the house's strange protocols make this refuge, with its worn velvet and weathered leather, feel increasingly like a gilded prison. And when Baby's obsessive desire for acceptance ends in tragedy, Inez begins to suspect that the school, in all its shabby splendor, hollowed history, advanced theories, and controlled decadence, might be hiding a dangerous agenda that is connected to a secretive, tightly knit group of students selected to study its most promising and mysterious curriculum. Okay, so spooky school, kind of a student who would never be considered to go there otherwise gets to attend. I mean, common academic trope, right? Like we've seen that before. I like the promise of something spooky and sinister, but this one was just so weird and no point. And so I can absolutely see why this made it onto the list. The second worst book that I've read is in no way a reflection of my enjoyment. The book is called Squeak, and this one I read it in May 2023. I rated it 4 stars. I loved this erotic novella, and it sounds weird, okay? You're gonna question my sanity when I tell you what it's about. But my biggest complaint is that this book wasn't longer. I loved it. It was so creative. It was so silly. This is kind of like an Omega-verse romance, which is like a subgenre of like spicy books, where there's like an alpha, a beta, there's nodding, there's like different terms that you kind of need like a baseline understanding for. But there's one female and there's 2 guys, and the 2 guys have these magical abilities, or they're magical creatures actually. They have a human form, but generally their junk is a balloon animal that shoots funnel cake icing. It's weird. Okay, I know it's weird, and I hope my mom is not watching this right now. Actually, I've already told her about this book, so she's well aware. But this was just so silly and fun, and it's a novella, so it's not long. You're not gonna have crazy character development, lots of intricate plot twists. This was such a good escape, and it was weird, and it was delightful. So this is a case where weird really worked for me. Like I said, I just wish it was longer. The ending was really rushed. It was just like, poof, problem is solved, and I needed more. I wanted more of the balloon animal junk. I disagree. I disagree with everyone who rates this so poorly that it lands on this list. We are at the number 1 spot. The worst book that GoodReads says I have read since I opened my account in 2017. I've read over 850 books, and this has the lowest ratings. I'm shocked. I am floored. This is the biggest shocker in the whole list. I can't even believe this is on the list, let alone the worst one. And that's because it's written by Colleen Hoover. What? Mind blown. She has like a cult-like following. How does she have the worst book on the list? I'm talking about the book Confess. And I read this in February of 2020. I rated it 5 stars. I really enjoyed it.
So I'm just sitting here editing this, and I thought it was really interesting as I'm putting these screenshots in that the average rating for Confess was 4.08 when you look at these other ones and they were lower than that. So I just did like a quick quality check, and I'm not lying to you. Like, that is the worst one sorting by average rating. I think the reason why it's like a higher rating but still the worst one is because it's taking a look at how many total ratings there are. So there are 542,000 people. I still think a 4-star rating is pretty decent, but this is what GoodReads says as like a weighted average is the worst book. So I promise I'm not lying, even if it looks a little funky.
I think my reading preference has evolved since 2020, and I've read enough of Colleen Hoover's books that I'm not as big of a fan of like her contemporary romance stuff because it seems too formulaic to me, where she has like a romance based in trauma, and it's fine for like 1 or 2 books, but since she just like copies and pastes that formula, to me, I feel like it's too manipulative of her readers, and I don't like that in my books, when I feel like they're just forcing trauma on you just to get you to be like emotionally involved in the story. It's not good writing. I don't enjoy it. But I enjoyed this when I read it and rated it 5 stars. And I also liked the whole artistic take on this. So let me just tell you what it's about. Auburn Reed has lost everything important to her. In her fight to rebuild her shattered life, she has her goals in sight and there is no room for mistakes. But when she walks into a Dallas art studio in search of a job, she doesn't expect to find a deep attraction to Owen Gentry. For once, she takes a chance and puts her heart in control, only to discover that Owen is keeping a major secret from coming out. The magnitude of his past threatens to destroy everything Auburn loves most, and the only way to get her life back on track is to cut Owen out of it. This sounds like very vanilla, basic romance, right? To save their relationship, all Owen needs to do is confess. But in this case, the confession could be much more destructive than the actual sin. That summary doesn't really tell you much. So their relationship is kind of based on this lie that he's hoping that she doesn't find out. The art studio I really like. So I think it's like outside the wall, he asks passersby to anonymously write down their biggest secret. And then he creates like a painting or a piece of art from that secret. And it's just so cool. Like the idea of an artistic spin on someone's like deepest, darkest secret. And like the art concept I really liked. I found the interconnected secret that Owen has with Auburn. I thought it was very like twisty in the plot, and I really liked it, and I cried. I was emotionally attached, so I cried. So this book, I mean, definitely targeted me. It hit me. I loved it. 5 stars. And I'm shocked that this is on the list. Even now that I've said that my reading has evolved past Colleen Hoover's formulaic contemporary romances, I still don't even think this is the worst that I've read. And I can't imagine her fan base would allow for this to be the worst book. Out of 100 or out of 850 books, her fan base lets this be the worst one. Whoa. So that is my list of the 20 worst books that GoodReads says that I have read. As you can tell, I don't agree with most of the books on this list. There were a lot of positives, or there were some that I just felt like lukewarm, mediocre, neutral about, but they weren't bad. I didn't actively dislike them. So I don't know if I could trust GoodReads ratings that much. I always think, give it a shot, because I think pairing the right book with the right mood is important, the right reader. Like if you're reading a horror book but you don't like horror, you can't be mad that it scared you, right? And then like rank it low. So I think that ratings and reviews are important to take into consideration, but don't let it dissuade you from trying a book that you're really interested in. Of course, you get another problem if the book is mismarketed. If you think it's about one thing and has certain vibes and then it delivers something else, that can really lead to low ratings. But I mean, it is what it is. Read what you want to read. It's all in good fun. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in this video. I'm curious to see in the comments below what you think of this list and if you agree or disagree with any of these. So please drop a comment before you go. But until I see you in the next video, happy reading!